Hello there. Today we'll take a historical walkabout of how did the university arrive to its present academic governance structure that we have today. We're going to start around 1880, which is when the Agricultural and Mechanical College, part of Kentucky University, what we call today Transylvania University downtown, we became separated as our own standalone agricultural mechanical college. Some laws were passed around that time. We see them here. For example, the Board of Trustees has the authority to grant degrees, comma, upon the recommendation of the faculty of the institution. Sometimes you're looking for where is punctuation really important, and this comma right here is the most important comma in all of state law for the faculty, because none of these board actions can happen except upon the recommendation of the faculty. This is a very important role here. The faculty have a final disapproval role on who gets onto the list, and then they say, okay, we approve this list to get to the board for the board to grant the final degrees. And this will become pivotal, as you'll see. 2 years later, the Board of Trustees promulgated the first of what we call today the governing regulations for internal implementing the state law. Number 6 of those regulations defined who are the faculty. So the faculty is the president and the professors. And here's an early photo of an inaugural faculty body from those early days. Now, this was very important for the board to make this definition because the statutes do not define the relationship of the university president to the statutory body, the university faculty. And so when the board defined that the president is one of the faculty, what it means is that when there's a Board of Trustees meeting and the president is sitting there at the table, that the president, as the parliamentary face of the faculty, presents a faculty direct connection to the board at that meeting. The president wears several kinds of hats, but one of the hats he wears is as the parliamentary face of the faculty. And so the faculty have used this several times over the years to cause the president, as their parliamentary face, to transmit to the board a university faculty item that the president otherwise would not have been inclined to provide to the board. An actual example of that from the College of Education is back 20 or so years ago when the College of Human Environmental Sciences was being ended, and a decision was being made as to where will the early childhood education program go. The administration wanted it to go to agriculture, but the faculty in the Senate received input from the program faculty that no, they wanted to go to the College of Education. And so the University Senate used this mechanism to cause the board to receive the Senate's position that the program ought to go over to the College of Education, which it actually did. Other regulations from those early days, number 7, the faculty keeps a book of its records. So there's the minutes of the early faculty that you can find over in the university archives. Number 189, all further regulations necessary for the policing and the discipline of the college are established by the faculty. So in those days, there was not this large apparatus that we would call today the administration. The faculty, just by the necessity of those early days, were not only the academic side, but were also a major part of the management of the college. So we have an organizational layout here, and I have several of these for its change over the years. The state law establishes there's a university faculty, there's a board. Through the internal governing regulations, the board provides for the faculty to control the degree list that gets to the board for the granting of degrees. The president wears 2 hats. In these outlines, the blue is the academic and the black is the managerial. And so we can see the president has those dual roles. And with respect to the managerial aspect hat, the president works with the faculty, who are also partly responsible for the policing and the discipline of the government. Now, this was the organization up through 1917. Now, there's a lot in between. You're seeing a 30-minute condensation of a 1-hour presentation. So we're jumping ahead of some neat stories here, but let's go to 1917. President McVeigh is arriving, and there's a general faculty meeting. The new President McVeigh takes charge. He's the parliamentary chair as the president. Let's look at some things that had happened during the intervening time to 1917. The faculty ranks now have several women in the faculty. The first woman dean of an academic college, Mary Sweeney. There is a group of faculty. Let's look at them here in enlargement. There's Barker. Next to him is the former president, Patterson. This person here standing next to Barker, who is that? Well, actually, we saw that person 40 years earlier in that picture of the early inaugural faculty. There he is back there. That's James White in his 40 years younger days. Whitehall Classroom Building is, James White. It's named after him. And we see on the left here, a generational passing of the baton is happening historically. So backing up just a bit also to another thing that had happened in 1908, the legislature raised the A&M College to a university level. Okay, so the heads of the departments were now deans. So the arts and science head was now the arts and science dean. The engineering head was now the engineering dean. Now, that created some tension, because the faculty, remember from their earlier days, the policing and the government, the faculty and the deans are saying, no, I mean, this is why we're deans, is because this is the kind of management that deans are supposed to be doing. So one of the things that McVeigh had to straighten out when he arrived was to bring resolution to this tension about the management, who's responsible for the management. And so there were some revisions made to the governing regulations. Those were called the Constitution at that time. It was a very transparent process. The draft of the amendments were sent to every member of the faculty for consideration before it was presented. Then in December 1917, the faculty, remember, all the faculty are meeting, and they're up to about 80 by about this time. They endorsed these changes to the governing regulations. Let's see what those changes were. So here's the pamphlet, 1918, that has the Board of Trustees governing regulations in it. Oh, there's some rules of the Senate. The Senate's been created, so we'll talk about that in a moment. So let's look at the president. The president presides over the Senate. Okay, that role is still there. In consultation with the Senate, no recommendations on general policy reach the board without first consulting the Senate. So we see here that there is a change. The faculty are not deciding managerial policy, but they're a mandatory advisory consult before the president takes managerial policy to the board. Now, what about this thing, the Senate here? President McVeigh was a very faculty governance, AAUP-oriented person. And in his mind, well, when the faculty are meeting as a body for academic purposes on academic policy, they're legislating academic policy. So let's have them have the title, the Senate, when they perform those functions. So who comprises the Senate? We see here the deans and the professors, the associate professors, the assistant professors, all the professorial ranks and the deans comprise this body, the Senate. And we see here the jurisdiction of this body, and in orange, here are these items that are the statutory functions that are reserved by statute to the faculty. So with these revisions, we have state law still establishes the faculty and the board. The board, through amended governing regulations, has prescribed how this body, the Senate, performs the functions that state law reserves to the faculty. Now we're going to jump ahead again. 1940, President McVeigh retires. An acting president comes in at the time, acting President Cooper. He was the Dean of Agriculture. Cooper Drive over there, Dean of Agriculture. Now, Thomas Clark was a historian, an eminent historian, a previous member of the university faculty. He was a young faculty member when what happened, and so I'm relating to how he described it to me when I talked with him in the late 1990s, early 2000s about this. It wasn't pretty. So during the McVeigh time, a Colonel Graham was appointed as Dean of Engineering. He was a colonel from World War I. He really had no academic experience on managing the academics of the university when he became dean. And he bristled at having to bring managerial things, even in a consulting way, through the university senate. He had some ideas about what he would do as an engineer to the coal pile, for example. And why should he have to bring this through the university senate, even for a consult? So he saw his moment when McVeigh, the faculty protector, retired, and there was this weaker moment of an acting president. So Graham got to the vice chair of the board. Now, the governor is actually chair of the board in those days, but the governor's mind is over in Frankfurt. The real power center was the vice chair, Stoll, who was on the board of trustees for 47 years. Okay, so Graham and Stoll did a cahoot that we're going to see to, in Graham's mind, solve the faculty problem. Thomas Clark described to me that Graham viewed the faculty as ants, and he wanted to move the ants off the chessboard. And so let's see what happened. So remember, the state law says that, well, it's upon the recommendation of the faculty, this faculty body, that the board can grant degrees. And so on April 1st, 1941, the board goes into executive session. Remember, there's no open meetings law in those days. And here's one of the cahooters, Vice Chair Stoll. The president, acting President Cooper, was run out of the meeting. So it's just the Board of Trustees. An amended governing regulations is put on the table, which says the faculty of the university, and remember, there's the state law out there, the faculty of the university. The faculty of the university is the final authority on the granting of degrees, subject only to the board. These will become in force when the new president, to replace the acting President Cooper, assumes duties in office. So there's our Vice Chair Stoll moving the adoption of the resolution for this new language. It was adopted. The nominating committee comes in by process. The new president, Donovan, is unanimously elected. Now, let's look again. Who comprised the faculty of the university? It's the deans. Notice, remember before, it was all the professorial ranks. The Senate has been abolished. The faculty as a member of the body is gone. And this statutory body now is purporting to be comprised of what we would call today the Provost Dean's Council. So the colonel got wind of this reorganization, what's going on here. And remember, Europe was in World War II at the time. And so, of course, the colonel uses language like, with blitzkrieg rapidity, the board has abolished the 63-year-old Senate. Campus is buzzing. What does this mean? And they went to acting President Cooper and said, how could you let this happen? And he goes, I was completely unaware of this. I was not told this was going to happen. So the new organization we have is the policy, the making role of the faculty has been totally abolished. They make no policy. The administration makes all policy, including academic policy. So state law still says there's this statutory body of the faculty out there and the board, but the board has amended its governing regulations to abolish the Senate, replace it with a body called the university faculty that's comprised only of senior administrators who are tasked to perform duties that state law reserves to the faculty. And this was the organization we had, at least for the next 2 years. Now, the faculty leadership of that time, they were the faculty were incensed as to what had happened. The faculty leadership got to the new President Donovan and said, you've got to solve this problem here. The plans you have for the university are not going to come to fruition if you got this unresolved problem here with the role of the faculty. And they point out, remember, the university cannot even legally graduate a class here, because when state law says the faculty control the degree list, it's upon their recommendation. It means the faculty. State law doesn't say upon the Council of Deans that the degrees are awarded. So 2 years later, April 1943, Donovan, in front of the board, proposes revising the governing regulations again, and this time it prescribes the faculty of the university has been enlarged to include the faculty of the university. But he wants a clear-cut line of demarcation between the administration functions and the faculty functions. So the wording that had been there about the university faculty and general policy is now deleted and replaced with the faculty having jurisdiction over educational policy. This is the first time educational policy as a phrase enters the nomenclature of the governing regulations. We're starting to see the nomenclature that we recognize today. So the amended governing regulations, this body, the university faculty, controls the granting of degrees. It's upon the recommendation of the faculty, but this body, the university faculty, that it includes the professors, has no management or administrative functions, these being expressly reserved to the president. If you go to our governing regulations today, Roman numeral 4.c, this sentence is right there. And this is the root of the bifurcation that we have today in the faculty on the academic policy and the administration on the managerial policy. The faculty were getting to be about 300 faculty by that time. And so the faculty meetings were like herding cats. And so the revised governing regulations also prescribed what we know today as the elective body of the faculty. So under state law, it still says the university faculty, which means the faculty as a whole, but as long as they are electing representatives who act for them, the idea is then that the spirit of the state law is still being served by those elected representative faculty. And in those days, the meetings were conducted at Lafferty Hall and in the no longer existing old law building. Now, this outcome begs the inquiry, well, what does educational policy mean? What are the edges of educational policy if those edges are the limits of the faculty's jurisdiction? In those days, educational policy probably meant what we today would understand to be credit hour bearing education. Now, this is going to change, but that's at that time what it probably was understood to mean. So we have our outline again: state law, the statutory faculty, the statutory board. The board has again revised the governing regulations so that this statutory body, the university faculty, creates an elected subset that performs the functions that are reserved by state law to the faculty. We've been talking about the university level, the president, the board, the university faculty body, the statutory body. Let's talk for a moment about what's happening down at the lower levels, for example, the departments. So if we jump to the early 1960s governing regulations, it refers to the department staff and the head of the academic department who has supervision control over, now this is what we call the credit-bearing education. So department staff, head of the department. This looks very high schoolish. Those department heads were lifetime tenured into their position as department heads. Deans were tenured as deans. Heads were tenured as heads. You couldn't get them out. Over decades, you couldn't get them out. The faculty chafed over that. There were opinion surveys, and they felt that the deans and heads were just setting up local fiefdoms. So there was a new election, a new governor, so a new chair of the board. It also happened right about that time that, remember, Donovan had left in 56. Dickey from the College of Education had become president for several years. In 62, Dickey leaves to go on to do other things in higher education. And so the faculty leadership at that time, kind of remembering the way Dean Graham had gotten to the Board of Trustees back in 1941, the faculty get to the new governor and implore you've got to bring in a new president from outside the system here who's going to shake the system up. We've got an ossified administrative structure here. And so in the 1960s, if you're going to bring in somebody from out of state who's going to shake up the educational system here at the university, what state do you go to in the 1960s? Come on, boomers. Who is what state do you go to? You go to the University of California. Okay, and that's what we did. We went there and brought in President Oswald. And Oswald arrived for the September meeting of the faculty. And at that time, the president still had up to that moment always literally presided fully over every meeting of the university level faculty body. Oswald arrives, and he gestures over to the DeShawna Collette, the Senate Council chair of the time, and says, "Hey, I'll be here as a resource, but I really think the presiding of this body ought to be in the hands of the Senate Council chair so that it's in the hands of a faculty member." Now, notice the goodwill that bought him, and it didn't cost him a penny to do that. So whenever I give this history and we reach this moment, and I'm giving it to new President Todd or new President Capilouto or new provosts or new deans or faculty councils, I point out, look how effective Oswald was here. Always look for ways to extend an overture and show the faculty you're appreciating them and you want to work with them. And there are ways to do it that don't cost you anything, but they mean a lot. 2 years later, Oswald did a similar action. The faculty leadership said, we used to be known as a Senate. Would you support to the Board of Trustees our becoming renamed back again to the Senate to connote our legislative governing functions? And Oswald goes, yes, I'll support that. And so in 1965, supported that to board, and we got Senate back. So that's why we're called the Senate today, is we got it back at that time. Didn't cost Oswald a penny to do that. But again, look at the goodwill he's building. The following month, in 63, October 63, after that initial meeting in September, he's telling the board, I want us to grow in quantity and quality and move ahead. Remember, the 60s was this roaring time for higher education. The money's pouring in, and he's got ideas, and the faculty leadership, has got somebody who's supporting them in their role in it. And so that's when also the regulations change to remove the permanent department head system to go to a rotating fixed term department chair system that we have today. Now, the chair can be reappointed, but it's a fixed term. It roots to this time. President Oswald did a number of other important things in our university's history. He hired the first Black faculty at our university. President Oswald was a very big proponent of academic freedom and free speech in the university setting. Now, there had been a situation in which Abby Marlatt, a renowned social activist herself, she was arrested downtown in a stand-in at a segregated movie theater. Remember the 1960s, we got sit-ins and stand-ins. She was arrested at a stand-in downtown protesting the segregation policies of that theater. There was also a leftist student group in the 1960s, Students for a Democratic Society. Charges were filed against them of sedition. A university law professor offered to contribute his time to the legal defense of that group. President Oswald was very, very supportive that the university campus would be a site of open fora and discussion and protest over social justice issues. Now, if you're a local Lexingtonian at that time, this all looks very California-ish to you. And the local populace became concerned. You know, they see, protest, sedition, arrest. What are those university faculty doing over there to those young, impressionable minds of our students? And so they actually, some leadership locally instigated a grand jury being convened to examine, what illegality might be going on over there at that university. Now, they didn't find any illegality going on, but they actually, in their findings, said, well, really think the Board of Trustees should make sure that it's hiring people whose opinions are compatible with our local public here. And, President Oswald, said, no, that's not what a university is about. And he gave a very stirring speech before the Board of Trustees. His teachers and students must be permitted to investigate any theory, to challenge any premise from any political point of view, engage in social debate from any point of view without jeopardy to their academic careers. Fast forward to today. If you go to the governing regulations today, the section on academic freedom of faculty, our freedom as scholars, it directly is quoted. The words there are taken from the speech by President Oswald here. Right? So it comes from this moment. Now, there was another election in that brought another governor on board. A different political party, and I'm not going to say which one it was, but the new chairman of the board made it very clear that was going to, at that time, the governor, the chair of the board, also appointed the members of the board. And so it was very clear that this new governor chair was going to appoint members of the board who were going to go against what Oswald wanted to do. And so Oswald saw the handwriting on the wall. Here we see him tendering his resignation at the Board of Trustees. So this room right here, those of you who've been to the main building, what today is Provost DePaula's office, that is the office right here. These two windows in the back there, those are the two windows you look out and you see the Buell Armory. Off to the right over here, you look out this window, there's Patterson Office Tower. That gives you a sense that the corner room there, that was the board room at that time. So after he gave this speech announcing his resignation, he walked out to the front of the administration building, and that large lawn out there in the front of the administration building. It was estimated up to 1,000 faculty and students there. Oswald, we want you to lead us, not leave us. They were very distressed that Oswald was leaving, but we shot ourselves in the foot. He went on to Penn State to do some great things there. Now, the faculty were very concerned. Oh my gosh, Oswald has done this so much for us for the governance aspect, but he's going to leave. And a lot of what he had done, had done by presidential policy memo. So they were worried, oh gosh, is a new president going to come in who's going to issue policy memos, something different? And so they convinced Oswald to, before he leaves, initiate another round of revision to the governing regulations that would codify the governance structure that he had supported for the faculty. And so here we see on the upper left, there's the faculty, the Senate meeting in the moot courtroom of the old law building, and they're endorsing the Oswaldian amendments to the governing regulations. Now, those didn't reach the board. there's the board on the bottom right there, 18th floor, Patterson office tower. Didn't reach the board till after Oswald had actually left. It fell into the lap of President Singletary, and there was a lot of concern. Because Singletary could kill it, but in the end, he supported it, and the board approved the amended governing regulations. And these are the governing regulations we have today. We have the Oswaldian governing regulations. So let's look what it says. In the section on university president, the president is responsible for promoting instruction, research, and service. In this connection, the president makes recommendations to the board and Senate, which are the primary educational policy forming agencies of the university. This was very important because this shows now the policy that inside the university, educational policy happens in all three mission areas, not just the credit hour bearing instruction, but educational policy comes to need to be made in all three mission areas. An example of that was, at that time was created for the first time this kind of educational unit that we call the research center educational units. So we got colleges, we got departments, we got schools, research, multidisciplinary research center or multidisciplinary research institute as a kind of educational unit was started at that time. Now, there are administrative centers that are run as purely managerial enterprises, but these are a kind of educational unit. They don't home credit hours, but they home non-credit educational programs. In this case, non-credit bearing education that emphasizes research. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So at the level of the University Senate determines the broad academic policies. The only thing that has to reach the Board of Trustees nowadays is a new degree or the termination of a degree. All other academic policy, credit bearing or non-credit bearing, is under the ultimate jurisdiction of the University Senate. Now, that's at the level of president and Senate. What about at the level of the departments and colleges? So here is some correspondence going between one of the faculty trustees of the time, and maybe the Holly Swanson of the time, to one of the faculty leaders of the time, saying the section about department chairs is completely rewritten. It's the most important changes that we've got here. So let's look at what happened for the departments and the colleges. So, and this is the Oswaldian governing regulation that we have today. The department faculty has jurisdiction on its internal educational policies. The department faculty, has jurisdiction over the academic requirements, courses of study, class schedule. See, remember, that's the credit bearing stuff. Now, remember in the early 60s, that was over under the head of the department. You can see that's been pulled now to be very clearly under the jurisdiction of the faculty body, and this continues, primary responsibility for policies on research programs, service functions, all three mission areas. So to the extent that educational policy comes to need to be made in credit hour bearing or non-credit hour bearing research or non-credit hour bearing service activities, it's the faculty of the department that make that policy. What about at the level of the colleges? Again, the college faculty determines its educational policies. There's the credit hour stuff. And here we see the non-credit hour research programs, professional programs, service functions. And the policies for all of this are provided for in the rules of the college faculty. Now, the Senate itself has a rule about this in relation to the non-credit hour bearing activities. If a proposed course will not be recorded on a UKK transcript and not used toward a certificate or degree, then by delegation here, it's delegated down to the college faculty through its rules document about the quality control over the pedagogical content of the non-credit bearing education that doesn't get on the transcript or is used for a degree. Again, some examples of that kind of non-credit bearing education that the faculty have jurisdiction over the policies about content. Research centers. So for example, when a research center has annual symposium on something and there's a poster session and the postdocs who are a kind of non-credit bearing student who can be homed in the educational unit center, there's a poster session, they're getting education about posters and the science of the area by the activity in that symposium. Here, the libraries faculty, remember, they're the equivalent of a college. They have community service outreach in which they go out to the communities to teach them methods to acquire information about their local history and curate and preserve that information about their local history. There's educational content here being created and delivered by faculty to community learners. It's non-credit bearing, but the content and policies about that content is under the jurisdiction of the libraries faculty. And for example, I mentioned the post-terminal degree residencies. There are a number of professional programs that have those. These are, I'm referring here to the non-credit hour bearing ones. Again, the policies about content of those, the University Senate has delegated down to the local college faculties to control that. The revised governing regulations also made it very clear the authorities that the deans have over the managerial side. The deans are authorized to establish any policies and procedures that are necessary for their administrative duties to carry out their management functions. And we see a number of the management functions here that are reserved to the deans. So we've got educational policy being made by faculty bodies on one side. We've got management policies being made by the management on the other side. Now, the managers wear two hats. They're the parliamentary presiding officer, except as they delegate otherwise to the faculty bodies, and then they are also the managerial CEOs. Now, what does shared governance mean here? Okay. Different people come to University of Kentucky from different places that maybe shared governance meant something different there. So in 2005, there was an effort to get everybody on the same page. So university leadership worked very hard, and the provost and Senate Councilor Indiana Rella worked very, very diligently on this to devise a definition for the governing regulations codified by the board that brings everybody mandatorily onto the same page about definition. And essentially, what that definition says is, as the faculty bodies on their side and as the management persons on their side make decisions in their respective area, they are expected to be soliciting and benefiting by the input, the advisory input from the other side. That's what shared governance is defined as by our Board of Trustees. Let's give an operational example here. For a degree program, we'll use that as an example. The Gender and Women's Studies degree program a few years ago was proposed. A department infrastructure, this is the space, the staffing, the budget to home this program was proposed. These are related, but they're two different things. So for the academic content, the degree program that came up out of the college, the University Senate was in a position, it could say, well, this aspect, we're not sure about this. What about those electives? And hold back approval until it's satisfied, and then let it through. And it did approve. Now, the provost and president can give advisory input. There's the shared governance advisory input, but they can't stop it. They cannot prevent the University Senate's recommendation about this new degree from reaching the board for final action. Now, the board can decide yes or no, but the Senate compels it to reach to the Board of Trustees. Now, what about the infrastructure, the unit that's going to home this degree? There, the Senate is in an advising role, and the Senate gives advice on these things. We've seen this at the level of University Senate. That's why it's framed as an advisory, endorsing, or a non-endorsing action. As compared to over here, it's an approval or a disapproval action. Oh, on the managerial part, the faculty render advisory, endorsement, or non-endorsement. Now, that proposal could have been stopped, say, by the president. The president could have said, well, I don't think we got the budget for this. At this time, we don't have the resources for the staff. And the president could stop the creation of the department from reaching the board for final approval. Okay. So both of these are getting the input of the other before finally reaching the board of trustees for action. So about 30 minutes ago, we started back here with the early faculty body, and we have now arrived to our current moment. And the College of Education, faculty and administrative leadership are in a position now at the start of the current academic year to determine in a shared governance way, what does shared governance look like in the College of Education environment. And with that, I thank you for this opportunity to share this academic history with you. Have a good day.